Greetings to everyone watching. We are Group 1 of LWB03A and we are going to present our Assessment 1 for LAW504. Here are the groups and enjoy.
The first issue is whether Safi Bank can foreclose Yusuf's land and all items attached to the house. Section 5 Subsection D of National Land Code mentioned that the land includes all things attached to the earth or permanently fastened to anything attached to the earth. From this section, there are two limbs identified. The first limb, all things attached to the earth, and the second limb is permanently fastened to anything attached to the earth. The second limb of this section may be difficult to determine. To determine whether a particular item forms part of the land or not, one needs to look at whether such item is feature or chattel. A feature is an item that is attached to the land and immovable, which it shall form part of the land. Meanwhile, a chattel is when an item, even if attached to the land, is removable and shall not form part of the land. This principle was enunciated in the case of Minshaw and Lloyd, where it was laid down that the general rule that whether it's attached to the soil becomes part of the soil. The facts of the case were that A leads a colliery to B with the right of putting steam engines. In pursuit of this right, B erected several steam engines which were affixed to the soil in an ordinary way. The engines were subsequently seized as a result of default in payments as stipulated in the covenant. It was held that the engines had been partially affixed in a substantially manner to the land and that everything substantially and permanently affixed to the soil is in the law a feature. This applies to the Malaysian case Goh Chong Hing and another and the Malay Consolidated Malay Rubber Estate Limited, which in order to ensure that the item consists of machinery affixed by the proprietor to the land is a feature, the court held that the machinery which was affixed to the earth by bolts and nuts become a feature and form part of the land. There are two tests to distinguish the item is feature or chattel, which is degree of annexation test and purpose of annexation test, as in the case of Holland and Hodgson. The first test is degree annexation. This test is to determine that the item can be easily removed without any difficulties and without injury to the item or to the premises. If the item can be easily removed, then the item is a chattel. Meanwhile, if the item difficult to be removed, then the item is a feature. The second test is called the purpose of the annexation test. This test is to determine the purpose of the items that are attached on the land. If the purpose of the annexation of the items is for the enhancement of the value of the land, then the item is or stopped to be a chattel and vice versa. According to the case of Sofing Co Limited and Chairman Klang Town Council, a dispute arose as to the nature of the above ground storage tanks, including of cylinders that were resting on precast concrete pillars standing on a reinforced concrete rough foundation for the purpose of storing palm oil. Ong J held that the tanks are sited on the holding to improve the land and for its better use and enjoyment. In addition, the storage tanks are annexed to the land so as to form the land. There is a certain situation that there is an exception towards the general rule of feature and chattel. The exception that to be discussed is the exception of written agreement, which there is establishment of chargee relationship between the bank. All features, whether attached after or before the date of charge once disclaimed by the bank, shall not form part of the land and therefore falls under the exception. In the case of Wigin Tip Malaysia Sdn Bhd and Bahagia Trading Sdn Bhd, a property was charged to the bank in which a printing machine which was under a hire purchase scheme was affixed to the property floor with bolts. The charger failed to loan repayment and the bank took proceedings to enforce the charge. A dispute arose as to whether the machine formed part of the property and thus also a subject matter of the charge. It was said that the machine is a fixture and thus passes to the chargee even if it was attached to the land after concluding the charge agreement, unless of course the contrary was provided for in the contract.
Hello. So right here we are going to apply the law into the issue itself and what we have learned so far. So according to the law that is stated before, what is the relationship between Yusuf and the irrigation system and whether to determine it if it's a fixture or chattel? Applying the Holland against Hodgson principle for the first test, which is degree annexation, the test is to determine that the item can be easily removed without any difficulties or without injury to the item or to the premises in general. So the answer to this is rather straightforward, as the irrigation system is an irrigation system. It exists below and above ground, practically conjoining it and into the part of the land as the gardening system is used to grow sustenance for Yusuf, which effectively made it into a part of the land. The second is to determine whether the solar panel water heating system is a chattel or a fixture. Applying the principle from the case of Sokfin Co. Limited against Chairman Klang Town Council, it is to determine the second test, which is the purpose annexation test. This is to determine the purpose of the items that are attached on the land. If the purpose of the annexation of the item is for the enhancement of the value of the land, then that item eased or stopped to be a chattel or vice versa. And looking upon the facts of how a solar panel water heating system operates, where there is just more than just a solar panel bolted on top of the roof of the house, there are also water storage tanks that are rested on the house foundation, usually in the side of the house or usually in the backyards. The facts are similar to that of the case, hence it is determined that the solar panel water heating system are present to increase the value of the land and to increase the better use of the enjoyment of the land itself. Hence we determine it as a fixture. Now, to determine the status of the two things, which is a custom-made fridge that looks like a kitchen cabinet, which after applying the previous test is considered as a fixture. Same goes to the special grill. However, it is better to note that only the fridge that is purchased under the hire purchase agreement with Kita Bank. The special grill has nothing to do with it. As explained in the law section, where there exists a chargee relationship between Yusuf and Safi Bank, as they are partners where they have a written agreement between them. That is the establishment of a chargee relationship between Yusuf and Safi Bank. That can be said, the same can be said for Gita Bank and Yusuf. The only difference here is that Yusuf, as a security measure, has charged the land to Safi Bank in case there is a failure in the payment of the loan. That is a very important thing to note. Now, Safi's solar panel and irrigation system have already been established using the two tests, meaning it has total right and control over it. We're not going to even go over it. What we need to talk about is the exception that enables Safi Bank to disclaim the fridge as the chargee in the relationship between Safi Bank and Yusuf. Now remember that the fridge, Yusuf's fridge has a chargee relationship with Gita Bank also. So what does this mean? This meant that Yusuf owes Safi Bank and Safi Bank takes over all of its possessions that in turn supposedly repays Yusuf's debts to them, as this is within the clause of the written agreement, as Yusuf has charged the land to Safi. According to this, right? However, Gita Bank, which is also assumed to be owed by Yusuf, hence the objection by them in the first place. Yet it should be noted that the hire purchase agreement of the fridge that made under Yusuf and Gita Bank is not made with Safi Bank's knowledge or awareness in the first place. This is our argument. Hence, Safi's Bank's disclaimer of the fridge is under the perception that it is owned by Yusuf entirely. Now, this is not entirely wrong, because this also doubles when there is a speculation that since there is no issue between Yusuf and Gita Bank in the first place, it is not a wild assumption to assume that Yusuf has already repaid all of his hire purchase loan to Gita Bank in the first place, which practically made it effectively Yusuf's property in the first place. Furthermore, Gita Bank has no clause in their written agreement that gives them the right to object or closure of the items of Safi Bank in the first place, as Yusuf does not charge the land to Gita Bank. Hence, this meant that their objection is not valid. So to conclude, in conclusion, and to summarize, Safi Bank can foreclose all the item on Yusuf's land and the land itself, and Gita Bank has no right to object the disclaimer. Thank you very much.
The second issue is whether Yusuf may take legal action against Sarah to recover the lost suffered, as Sarah does not have the paramount right of support by the adjoining land. According to English law, the extent of right over one's land is extensive. In Corbett and Hill, at common law, the owner of the land is the owner of everything up to the sky and down to the center of the earth. The Latin maxim used here is referring to whose is the soil, he is also which is above and below it. However, the right to enjoy the land under the National Land Code is not absolute, as it is subject to limitation. Section 44, subsection 1 of the National Land Code provides the conditions or restrictions imposed by the National Land Code and limitation imposed by other law. Extent and nature of enjoyment of alienated land that is permitted is prescribed by the National Land Code. Two types of rights given to proprietor, lessee or permit holder are paramount rights or natural rights, as it involves with the land itself, and subsidiary right or limited right, in which there are certain limitations within the land's boundary, right as mentioned in Section 44 and Section 45 of the National Land Code. The paramount rights vested in the proprietor, lessee or temporary occupation license (TOL) holder, as stated in Section 44, subsection 1, paragraph A, B and C, are they entitled for the right to enjoy the column of airspace, right of support by the adjoining land, and right of access to foreshore, river and public space. The right to enjoy the column of airspace is an exclusive right, but not absolute and restricted, because of the need to balance the individual right of enjoyment of the land against the overall public right to utilize the land for common good. The right of support, as provided in Section 44, subsection 1, paragraph B, is where the landowner is entitled, in certain circumstances, to have his land supported by the neighboring land and right not to have that support removed. The right of support is necessary to safeguard the rights of owners of the land from being interfered. Concept of justice, where both land of the landowner and the adjoining land must support each other, and neighborhood principle, which means that the landowner must take reasonable care to avoid act or omission where he or she can reasonably foresee will likely to injure his or her neighbor. It is a negative right, whereby the right not to lose support from adjoining land is something that the landowner should not do on their land that endangers the neighbor's land. There are 4 conditions that must be fulfilled to claim the right to support. The first condition is the land at lower level must support the land above it. The second condition is the land must be adjoining to each other. The third condition is the land is in its natural state, where both landowner's land and adjoining land must be in natural state. If not, they will not have the right of support. What is natural state? Natural state can be defined as land unburdened with building and unweakened by excavation. The fourth condition is no additional support or strength to be given beyond what the land naturally had, which means The landowner cannot expect additional support if its land is already in the vacant state. In a later case, Guansung Tin Mining and Ampang Estate Limited, respondents made out a claim against the appellant that appellant had withdrawn support from the land when appellant worked on the adjacent land and obtained mining mineral, resulting in damages. Whether the appellant was under the obligation to support respondent under Section 44, Subsection 1 of the Natural Land Code was the issue. The court held that appellant was not liable as there was evidence that the land had already been excavated when the appellant entered into occupation. Based on the above situation, Yusuf as the landowner of the adjoining land of Sarah's land does not owe Sarah right of support, even though in Coben Hill it states that the landowner owns everything up to the sky and the center of the earth. The right has limitation under Section 44 Subsection 1 of the National Land Code. The negative right, where the right not to lose support from the adjoining land, is something that landowners should not do on their land that endangers the neighbour's land, is shown in Yusuf and Sarah's situation when Sarah's land collapsed onto Yusuf's garden, damaging the irrigation system. 4 conditions that must be fulfilled by Sarah to claim the right to support from Yusuf are: firstly, the land at the lower level must support the land above it. Since Sarah's land is adjacent to Yusuf's land, first condition is not fulfilled. Secondly, the land must be adjoining to each other is fulfilled when Sarah is the landowner of the land adjacent to Yusuf's land. Thirdly, the land is in its natural state, where both landowner's land and adjoining land must be in natural state. Sarah's land is burdened with building as she built chalet and weakened by excavation to build the chalet, proving her land is not in natural state. Therefore, third condition is not fulfilled. Lastly, no additional support or strength to be given beyond what the land naturally had. In above situation, Sarah cannot expect additional support from Yusuf's land as her land is already in the weakened state from the chalet built. Hence, Sarah failed to fulfill all 4 conditions to claim the right to support from Yusuf's land. In Madam Chia Siam and Chok Choi Kong Kong Si, plaintiff had been occupied with land for the purpose of rearing fish under license. Defendant occupied adjoining land and did mining operations, and one day the mining operation almost reached the boundary bank of adjoining fish pond. One night, the bank collapsed and the water of the pond poured into mine, bearing away a greater part of the fish pond. Plaintiff then claimed damages for loss of revenue and right of support of the land. The court held that excavated land is not liable as the containing fish pond is not in its natural state. Therefore, plaintiff had no right to additional support from the land included in the mining lease. The excavated land was only entitled to the degree of support required in its natural condition. By applying case of Madam Chia Siam and Chok Choi Kong Kong Si, the excavated land was only entitled to the degree of support required in its natural condition. Therefore, Yusuf is not entitled to the degree of support as Sarah's land is not in its natural condition, which is already burdened and weakened by the chalet build. Next, by applying case of Guansung Tin Mining and Ampang Estate Limited, Yusuf is not liable to paramount right of support as the land had already been excavated when Sarah built the chalet. Hence, Yusuf was not liable to paramount right of support to Sarah's land under Section 44, Subsection 1 of the National Land Code, and he may claim for the loss of faith as Sarah's land collapsed onto Yusuf's garden, damaging the irrigation system. In conclusion, Yusuf may take legal action against Sarah to recover the loss of faith as Sarah does not have the paramount right of support by the adjoining land.